You know it's going to be a great show when we open up the program by talking about Mason McTavish of the Anaheim Ducks. Because it turns out the Montreal Canadiens connection between McTavish and the Habs is alive and well. Last time we spoke about the trade price, courtesy of what Bruce Garriock posted about in regards to the Ottawa Senators. That was a conversation that highlighted what it may take the Canadiens to acquire Mason McTavish. But now, courtesy of Jimmy Murphy, Murphy's Hockey Law at Sick Media, we have two separate sources who have confirmed the Montreal Canadiens have indeed circled back on Anaheim Ducks center Mason McTavish. Let's check out this article, let's read what Jimmy Murphy has to say, and the latest on everything Montreal in regards to the McTavish conversation. Now, if you needed the update here, Mason McTavish, he's a guy we've made oodles and oodles of videos about over the past year and a bit. 23 years old, 6'1", 218 pounds, left-handed center signed till the end of 2031, making $7 million a year. Pretty reasonable dollar amount for a guy who, at 22 years old, scored 52 points in 76 games played. His production declined this previous season, but there were some issues with the way he was deployed, and you could also say the direction the Ducks want to go down, and whether or not that actually includes McTavish in their long-term plans. It's why McTavish's name is bubbling around the trade block. This was something we were talking about last year, too, when the guy was in the midst of a pretty nasty contract dispute with Anaheim, which ultimately got fixed up with this $7 million AAV contract. But now, McTavish is reportedly in talks once more, and the Montreal Canadiens have circled back on McTavish, courtesy of Murphy's Hockey Law. Two NHL sources have confirmed to Murphy that the Montreal Canadiens have once again inquired with the Anaheim Ducks on the trade availability of center Mason McTavish. They circled back and called on him. One of the sources told MHL recently, "I don't think it's at the point of serious discussions or exchanging trade scenarios, but the Habs let it be known they are still interested." The second source confirmed that, and while he also confirmed that a trade return for McTavish had not been discussed, he believes the starting point for the Ducks would be Canadiens' top prospect and University of Michigan center, Michael Hage. "I would think any discussion is starting with Hage," the source opined. Again, at this point, that is just the source's opinion, not fact. Now, I just gotta say this right off the hop here. Michael Hage being included in a trade for Mason McTavish, that's a lot different than the reports we had heard from Bruce Garriock that supposedly Mason McTavish's trade price could be a first-round pick and a roster player. A top prospect is an entire other element, period. Last time we spoke about whether or not Mason McTavish could come over to Montreal for a first-round pick and a guy like Kirby Dach, for example. Nick Kyprios' report on McTavish earlier in the week indicated that supposedly a first-round pick could be all that needs to be sent over to Anaheim to get a trade done, which, in my mind, still feels a little light. McTavish was third overall back in 2021, so Pat Verbeek and the Ducks giving up on somebody with that much draft caliber for just a measly first-round pick does seem like a bit of a loss. I'm much more inclined to believing the first-round pick plus a roster player package making more sense in the eyes of the Ducks. But if Michael Hage is all of a sudden tossed in there, firstly, we know he is not an NHL player right now. He'll be with the Michigan Wolverines, he'll be doing his thing, he'll be spending another year over there with an A on his sweater, maybe his brother plays with the Wolverines, who really knows. But for the Anaheim Ducks, if they want to build on what was a pretty successful season in 25-26, something tells me they wouldn't trade Mason McTavish in a package for purely future assets, right? I mean, there were already conversations as to whether or not the Canadiens could use Michael Hage in the NHL as a second-line center in this year's playoff run. They had a spot open for him. You think Philippe Deneau was the main plan to be second-line C as the Habs made the third round? No. They had ideas that Michael Hage could be in that spot, but he ultimately said, no, sorry, I want to stay in Michigan. I get that there is this element that Michael Hage could be NHL ready as soon as right now even, but I have a hard time believing the Ducks would willingly trade away a guy who was particularly useful and who did produce a decent amount of points in the playoffs for somebody who has yet to play an NHL game. It's why that trade package idea of a first and a roster player makes a lot more sense to me, rather than maybe a first and Michael Hage. Heck, if it's Michael Hage and Kirby Dach, for example, that makes a lot more sense in my mind, but then again, if you're Anaheim, are you getting the maximum value possible for a guy like Mason McTavish? Let's go back over to the article here and continue on with Murphy's report. The interest from Montreal does not come as a surprise, given what was reported here last month. I was told that when Mason McTavish was going through that contract battle and sat out part of camp before signing last September, the Canadiens made it clear they were willing dance partners if Pat Verbeek wanted to trade McTavish, an NHL source told Murphy's Hockey Law on May 24th. At the time, the Canadiens had their fan base buzzing, and the NHL taking notice that the Jeff Gorton, Kent Hughes, and Martin St. Louis Canadiens era had arrived. There's a lot of us wondering if, say, they get to the final and fall just short of winning. How much does that accelerate their process now? Even if they lose to the Hurricanes in 6 or 7 games, spoiler alert, they lost in 5, that's still further than they even likely projected to be right now. That city, the fans, they just realized how good this team already is, and they've gotten a hell of a ride. They're going to want more, and want it now. In my opinion, there aren't many other teams positioned to attack what's going to be an active trade market this offseason. I could see them circling back on McTavish. The Canadiens ended up losing to Carolina in 5 games, but Gorton and Hughes made it clear in their end-of-season presser that the team needs to build off this run, get better, and utilize the NHL trade market to do so. Remember, coming off of a first-round exit to Washington, last year, the Canadiens made a huge splash at the 2025 draft, acquiring Noah Dobson in exchange for 2 firsts and Emil Heineman. Dobson also signed an 8-year, $76 million extension. The now 23-year-old McTavish, whom the Ducks drafted 3rd overall, did not report to training camp last September due to a contract stalemate. The team and McTavish eventually agreed on his current $7 million AAV deal. However, McTavish and the team did not see the contract bump on the ice that they had hoped for, as McTavish struggled with just 17 goals in 75 games. That was 11 points fewer than last year, where he had 22 goals and 30 assists, and as a result, McTavish found himself a healthy scratch at times down the stretch and also in the playoffs. So, maybe not the best run in 25-26 for Mason McTavish. The Montreal Canadiens, though, if they were able to get this guy onto their team, I'd say they would use him in a more beneficial role. They would give him second-line minutes. They would be comfortable with allowing him to do his thing, more so than the Anaheim Ducks appear to be, what with their change in direction. They've got a lot of top-tier guys like Leo Carlsson and Cutter Gauthier, Troy Terry, all tearing it up. Mason McTavish seems to be more of an afterthought when it comes to players the Anaheim Ducks seems to value at this point in time. For what it's worth, you have Montreal Canadiens fans going out there and responding to this article, saying this: it's better to do it now, that his asking price is probably much lower than it was last year. You might be able to get McTavish for something fairly cheap, like Beck in a second. That's totally not what the article went out there and said. They were insinuating Michael Hage, but maybe if Hage and a second is enough to get it done, if you're Montreal, do you think about it like that a little bit more? Beck, a second, and a fourth to match the Zegras price? Okay, maybe. V. Jux says, I honestly wouldn't mind getting McTavish, and he wouldn't cost the house either. Yes, he has question marks, but I do think how Anaheim treated him and how he missed training camp this season really hampered his growth. I think plugging him next to Demidov would give that line a big jolt, and I like that he has a physical presence, whether that be at center or wing. If you have McTavish and Hage in the system, I think the odds are pretty high that one of them will establish themselves as a 2C. He's one of my top picks this summer and fits the timeline wonderfully. Again, that's of course assuming Michael Hage actually sticks around past this McTavish trade. But either way, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the reports that Montreal is indeed circling back on Mason McTavish? This just in, out of the sick media crew, how do you feel about the McTavish trade talks with the Canadiens? Let me know in the comments all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.